there were some good things. Not a lot of the starters played, but a guy that just keeps showing up, wide receiver Austin Watkins. And Watkins showing up again, over 100 yards receiving, bobbled that, turns upfield, and gets into the end zone for the touchdown. Take a look at this. Mohamoud Diabate with a safety to get the Browns on the board early in the game. And take a look at the overhead. Just textbook linebacker play, and able to finish and bring the man down in the end zone. And then Ronnie Hickman, undrafted rookie free agent safety, gets another interception, ends up in the concussion. They're looking at him potentially with a concussion, due in part probably because of the way he got hit in the head after he intercepted that. But those three guys have consistently shown up. How impressed have you been with them?
I mean, we'll start with Watkins. It's interesting he's wearing Jarvis Landry's old number. He's a bigger player than Jarvis Landry, but you see a lot of kind of that similarity. He finds kind of those seams. He settles into zones. He catches pretty much everything coming his way. I think it's really interesting that the Browns have played him as much as they have. That can mean one of two things: that while many of us think he's got a roster spot or should have a roster spot, that they really aren't sure. David Bell plays in 3 series. Watkins plays the entire game, basically. Seems like someone who is competing for a spot. Or does Cleveland just really want to see and have him prove it? They want him to make the roster, but they just want to continue to push him to prove it, to make that roster, show that he can do on special teams, those kind of things. But overall, you cannot deny the production. And as one of our readers on Dogs by Nature asked, if Watkins doesn't make the roster, and even Hickman here in a second, what is preseason even for when it comes to kind of roster decisions? If GMs and coaches have already decided who's going to make the roster based on where they were drafted, their speed, whatever it is, and not the fact that Watkins, Hickman, Diabate have looked good against quality opponents. It's not just in the fourth quarter. It's earlier in games, those kind of things. So Watkins is going to be an interesting one. I feel like almost every year or every other year, there's a Browns receiver that really kind of jumps out and we're like, oh, they've got to make the roster. And most of the time they don't, right? Kadarius Hodge is an example. There have been a variety of others. Hickman, 3 interceptions. Feels like him and D'Anthony Bell are kind of competing for that 4th safety spot. Many were surprised that Hickman went undrafted. I think Diabate is a really interesting one, where we have to give some credit to the defensive line. Last year, the linebackers didn't look good, but we know the defensive tackles were terrible. And so even that safety, I believe that was Shelby Harris and Jordan Elliott playing in front of him. So they did what they're supposed to do. It allows the linebackers to do something, to flow to the football, to have open lanes, all of that kind of stuff. The reality is the linebacker, much like a wide receiver, is dependent on a quarterback. Linebackers are dependent on that defensive line. And Diabate really has taken advantage of that. He's very athletic. I think he makes sense as a player who can play on special teams. But right now, besides Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, the Browns really don't have anyone that is planned on the roster starting next year. Everybody else is on a 1-year contract. So Diabate makes sense as kind of maybe their long-term guy with JOK.